So welcome to tonight's show. I'm Paul Tizzard. I'm going to be going through some interview tips with you tonight. But before we get into that, I want you to put a note in your diary because on the 15th of March, we're going to be talking to Care Skills Pro. You may have noticed a little advert there about a future in the care industry. And there's a load of really great stuff there. In particular, there's going to be a fast track for crew. So make sure you know, 15th of March. So I'm going to shut up. Cue titles, please.
Not Just Crew has been internationally inspired by you.
Well, we look like professionals, don't we? So let me take you through what we're going to go through today. So at a glance today, we've got three main areas that we're going to go through. So we're going to go through some stuff, some interview tips around what you can do before, also what you can do during, and then a little bit about afterwards. And we're going to use this slide as a guide to take you through some of the stuff that we're going to go through. Now, let me just lay out my stall here. I don't do as many interviews as I used to do now, but I do a hell of a lot of assessment centers, which is where you use competencies to look at people's behavior. And maybe some of you have been through that yourself, where you go for a position, they say, we've got an interview. And as if that wasn't terrifying enough, we're going to shove you in an assessment center. What on earth's that? Well, the actual process of you being assessed is the same. And in fact, some believe that assessment centers are slightly more accurate because you get to see people in action and you get more of the time with them. So they're for a few hours, they're together working with other humans, and you just watch them for 2 or 3 behaviors or competencies and sort of see, can they demonstrate it? So you're looking for evidence, you're looking for examples. So in a way, interviews and assessment centers have that in common. So what I'm going to say now is I'm going to go through. So Trevor, if you could bring up the at a glance slide, I'm going to go through these 3 areas with you today. Please make some notes. I'm going to ask you for some questions at the end. So if there's anything you particularly want to ask about this, and then I'll happily take those questions. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is there's often this phrase that people say is good luck with the interview. And I think that's okay, but it's almost like some sort of mythical thing's going to happen. And I don't think luck's enough. I think you need to prepare. You need to prepare. And so what I want to do is take you through what can you actually do beforehand, why you'd bother doing that, what you can think about during it, and then maybe even a couple of things afterwards. So I've put it's all up on the screen there. So take a shot if you want to, a screenshot. I'm going to cover all of this and add some stuff in there. I've also got a live example I'm going to go through, which is I did a bit of research on just a random company. I won't tell you who it is, but I've just then pulled off, I just searched for what's their vision, values, and all that stuff that you have to sort of think about. And then we're going to go through, well, what might you say for this? So lots of stuff, hopefully, that you might have seen. I've done a couple of newsletters and blogs about this, particularly in the Not Just Crew weekly. In the last 2 weeks have been particularly around interviewing. So you may have caught those already. So imagine this, okay? So you're going for a job. Now, there's lots of ways that this can play out, and I'll talk about different types of interviews in a sec. But before you go anywhere near them, you need to start doing some prep. And the reason for that is because it gives you the opportunity to mentally rehearse what is going to come up and what's happening, what's likely to be going on, what will they put me through, what are they going to ask me. And you need to get used to just saying this stuff out loud, because in your head is not enough. You need that mental rehearsal that's verbal. Okay. So when you're doing your research, you're looking for things like, so if you're going to look at a website and you're thinking, I want to find out about them, you look up their values. You can just Google that. So if you're looking up Sainsbury's, you put, what are the Sainsbury's values? They'll be in there. What's their mission statement? What's their purpose? All that type of stuff. Sometimes they might call them behaviors. They might call them competencies. That's a kind of an older phrase now, but it's the same beast. Okay. So when you're looking these things up, it's really helpful because then you're thinking like them. The other thing that I would suggest, which is very helpful, I put it in brackets there, is what's in the news. So they'll often have a media site, and some websites will keep it up to date and others they just don't. But just a quick Google, what's going on. So I'm going to use Sainsbury's again because that's where I seem to spend most of my life during the pandemic at the moment, is Sainsbury's or not. That's it. But when you look up in the news, Sainsbury's, what's in the news, you'll see what's going on. And that'll give you some sort of things. It doesn't mean that you'll necessarily sort of crowbar that in. But the reason why you prepare is it gives you extra confidence. Okay, so when you know more about what's going on in that industry, you know a little bit about the competition and sort of the things they're excited about, it can make you feel like you're a better fit already. And you can, if the opportunity is right, slip that in. Okay, so the next thing I say in terms of your preparation is getting your stories. And what I mean by that is the examples of stuff that you do, and you do it well. And you think if you were running a little shop yourself and you were going to take some humans on to work with you and you didn't really know much about them, because it's like a first date, isn't it? You don't know them at all. They don't know you. They don't know how great you are. So stories are a shortcut to bring yourself to life and bring you into the room with them. So you're looking for stories where you've done really great things, like won somebody over, dealt with a difficult customer, dealt with a difficult colleague, as if such a thing exists. You've got something, you've overcome some sort of difficulty, or something you're really proud of. It's all that sort of stuff, all the great stories that are about you. And if you can't think of those, ask some friends. Ask some people that know you well and sort of say, how would you describe me? If you had to sort of say 5 things that I'm good for, and then just use those as ways of getting to think about it. Because what you're trying to do is to weave your stories into what they're going to come and ask you. If you've got these in the bag and you've used, which we'll call the STARE format, which we'll come back to in a second, this gives you something to hang on. Now, of course, they're not going to ask you exactly the same questions as you've prepared, but what it does do is it gives you that confidence to go in there. And the reason you're going in confident and prepared is that you can throw it out the window if it's not required. So I'm going to say that again. The reason you prepare is because probably only 20% of it's actually going to come up. But imagine you only prepared 20%. You're going to feel less confident and less prepared. So confidence is a con, as we always say. It's the first 3 letters. So building your confidence by getting all your stuff together, thinking about your stories, and then going through a certain procedure means that you're prepared for whatever could come up. And you're also prepared for when you don't use it. Yeah. Now, the next area I think that you need to think about is why me, why you, and what's your kind of USP? What's the thing? Because there's always, there's often a question. Why should we give you the job? What's so great about you? That's what they're thinking, isn't it? Why us? Why have you picked us? What is it about us that you love? So that's when your research around in the news and all that sort of stuff can come up. So it's worth being prepared on that. Now, sometimes people don't even bother with that. They just assume that you want to work there, otherwise you wouldn't have bothered turning up. But it's good to have that in your back pocket. The next thing I would think is very useful is to think about your achievements, okay? And also strengths and weaknesses. I know this is real classic stuff, and anybody who's a modern recruiter here will be going, oh, that's so last year, last decade, in fact. But actually, some interviewers still do this stuff now. So knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are is really helpful. Think about achievements, think about hobbies, because they might ask you. And they're not trying to catch you out. They just want to know kind of who's this human in front of me as a sort of a complete person. What are they about? What drives them? If you say, well, I binge watch Netflix, thanks very much for asking. It's always going to create a certain perception in their brain. So you want to be thinking about, well, how might it land? What are your actual hobbies? So if it is reading or going to cinema or hanging out with friends, you just like, how do you couch that so it sounds positive? Because it's all about positive. Yeah. Now, something I want to say before we get on to these next bits is remember, there's a good thing here. I forgot to say this. You're in an interview. They already like you. They don't have to interview you. Remember that. You're already in the interview. So they've already sifted out hundreds or maybe thousands of people. And now you're in that final group. So this means your CV and your covering letter have worked, because that's the purpose of those two beasts. It's just to get in an interview. The purpose of an interview is to get to the next logical step. an assessment center, another interview, whatever it is. But that's the purpose. So to compartmentalize it. But the good news straight away is they must like you. Otherwise, they wouldn't be wasting their time talking to you. It's so time consuming and exhausting. When I used to do lots of interviewing, you don't want to be interviewing anybody you don't. If you can get rid of people, fantastic. Just have the ones. If you can get it down to sort of 5 to 10, brilliant. It's exhausting. Now, at the moment, a lot of these things are being done this way. So it's really, there's some really basic common sense ideas here. So getting things right, like what microphone are you going to use? Where do you look? So can you see actually down the camera? So I'm actually looking at you now and I'm making eye contact with you. But if I was looking at you on a screen, I'd be tempted to do this because I can look at you because you're talking to me. But then I'm not actually making eye contact with you. So it's a tiny thing, but eye contact. So how do you know where that point is? How do you know how good your microphone is? How do you know how good your lighting is? So here's my extra lighting. This is how a lot of people go to interviews. It's a really obvious thing, but you're losing impact. I've got several settings on my light. This is one of those little things you get from Amazon. They're only cheap. It's on a little tripod thing with a control on it. I've set the lighting to romantic, which makes me look like I've got suntan, even though I haven't been anywhere. So having the right lighting. So the lighting has to come into your face, not to the side, and definitely not behind. I'll show you an image later if I get time of somebody that I interviewed earlier where they just look shocking. It was just shocking. So when you're looking down the camera, then record it. So the reason I want you to record it, whether it's on Zoom or Teams, you know, you can create just do a new meeting. Even on the free Zoom application, you can just press new meeting and then you can record it and listen back to it, and you will learn so much because you'll then realize how good is your microphone. So I wouldn't recommend buying anything you don't need to. I've got a cheap little 40 quid, say, USB mic, which I'm using a lot at the moment because my really expensive one is knackered. I was before using the laptop mic, which is actually quite good, but it has this thing where it cuts out at the beginning of your sentence. And so people here go, yeah, and it's just weird. And so because it's picking up on what you're saying and not being that responsive, it's not that helpful. So that's why I invested in this other mic. And I had this other 40 quid one, which I've had for about 12 years, this Samsung Go mic. And then I've recorded these several times and I can see now, I know where the eye line is, I know about the lighting, and I know about the sound. And this gives you massive confidence. Okay. So practice doing exactly this and try some questions out and listen to yourself. I never watch my stuff back if I can avoid it because I can't stand listening to myself, but it's really important to do this. And this will help with this final point here is about emotional hijack prep, is that you probably know this. When you go into an interview or to a threat situation, sometimes you feel like your brain shuts down a bit. You get fuzzy headed, you can't hear sometimes, and you get tunnel vision, so we got a bit of adrenaline and cortisol going on. And that's because we worked out we're in a threat state. So how do you prepare for that? Well, I could tell you you're going to have to do some meditation and all that stuff. Yeah, that's all really helpful. But the really practical way is just to practice. Because the more times you rehearse doing something well, the more you then have practiced it going well. So the more times you practice it, the more chances of it going well. So if you think about someone like Anthony Hopkins, he will read a script 100 times and say it out loud with all the different nuances that when he comes to deliver it, it's like, boom, he's got it because he's already practiced it and it's there. It's all automatic. I'm not suggesting you should do that with your interview questions because it could be a bit stilted, but absolutely you should be saying them 3 or 4 times out loud to another human or at least to a camera like this. Okay, so that's your before stuff. So what do you do when you get in there? So we need to begin well and end well. So these are obvious things. What does that actually mean? Well, you need to get your mindset right. Remember, you are both meeting to solve a problem. You are both meeting to solve a problem. Your problem, you don't have a bloody job and you want a job and you quite like the look of this one. Their problem is they want a good person to do the work. There's stuff that needs doing and they want somebody who's a good fit and is going to come in. So actually, you are 2 equals meeting to solve the same problem. So that's the mindset. Remember, you're in the interview, so they already like you. Next thing is a reminder, eyes. But let me just put a little bit more on that. Keep looking at them, look down to them, look up to them, look down to them, look up to there. So this gives you the eye contact for them, but also gives you a chance to read their faces, because this is really important. Don't just stay on their faces like that, because then you're just looking down, and don't stay like that all the time, because you have no idea how your message is landing. So you need to do a little flick every now and then. Not too much, because it looks like perhaps you're having a spasm, but just enough so that you can see what's going on. Now, the first thing that comes out your gob needs to be positive, and you need to plan for this, because most interviews, whether it's a traditional or a more modern one, will still say, tell us about yourself, or bring us up to date with your CV, or what you've been up to. It's the same deal. 90 seconds, tell us about you. Okay, and what they're trying to do, as we all know this, they're assessing your attitude. What are you like? What would you be like? Are you going to be some sort of weirdie or some nightmare to work with? Or are you going to be fairly easy to have around? Would you be a good team fit? So all of this is going on, whether they're aware of it or not. So that first 90 seconds needs to be really positive, and practice it, practice it, practice it. So it's not like, oh, well, I've been doing that. That's just crap. You need it to be fluid and fluent, so that people go, all right, okay. So you might say, yeah, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this, because I've been interested in this sort of area for a while. Or let me tell you about my background. So I started off, I've been 20 years working in this industry, and I've moved from this type of, so keep it kind of almost helicopter level in chunks and positive. And if you can weave in something amazing about them, and the reason I've went for this job was because I've always liked such and such, or I was really interested in ... Okay. Without selling your souls. It doesn't have to be really cheesy. Do it genuinely, because you're either if you're interested in the job, it should be quite easy to do it. If you're bluffing it, then it's going to feel cheesy, because you don't really want the job anyway. So I'm assuming you wouldn't waste your time to go for a job you don't want. Okay, so this is the thing about preparing, and I've got this is something that I find interesting. So I prefer the first type of interview, which is the super HR person or recruiter, a well-organized, a well-trained person, because they're going to go through, they're going to make you feel relaxed, because they know that's the best way to get the best from you. They're going to do chit chat. They're going to ask you good questions. They're looking for evidence. They're looking for you to say, I did this, I did that. They know what's codable and what's not. Yeah. So just for clarity, I statements are really good, because they can say, I did this, I saw that this needed to change, so I approached my manager and I said blah blah blah, and then we did blah blah blah. So let's just chuck a few we's in, because it sounds like it's a teamy thing, but remember, the I is the most codable stuff. So the super HR person knows that, and that's what he or she's listing for. Fantastic, job done. The next one is what I'd call either the untrained person, which is open brackets, frigging nightmare, close brackets, or the nervous first timer who's following the questions that someone's given them, because they've been told it's got to be fair, so they'll follow the questions. So can you tell me about why we should give you the job? It's just awful, because you're bringing lots of personality and they're bringing zip. That's because they're nervous. So be prepared for that. And it might mean that you need to be sort of a bit more smiley, a bit more kind of forgiving, and just allow for what their lack of kind of skills, I guess, so you want to put it. So those are the two main types. Here's my worst type, and I have experienced this, and I've heard loads of stories. I've called them the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneurs obviously wants to do everything differently. So they're going to reinvent the whole book. There's no book. So they might begin the interview like, hi, how's it going? And you're like, yeah, great, thanks. So what you got? And you're like, oh my God, what do I do with this? Because they're using their gut instinct. And I've had an interview like this where this guy literally sat back in his chair like that and went, so what's the best coffee you've ever had? I was like, what? So this is why you need to prepare, so that if it doesn't fit, you can throw it out the window, because this guy's not going to go. So if you start going, okay, so let me tell you a time when that's going to kill him off or her off. So for this person, you need to roll with it a bit, and you need to think, well, if I want the job, this person could actually be great fun to work with. And so how do I kind of meet them where they are? And so I don't like this particular, because it throws me, and my psychological flexibility is really challenged during this type of encounter. But for some people, they love it because they can just be themselves, then they can relax. But the downside of the entrepreneur, as I call it, is that they're using their gut instinct. So I've had one that talked at me once. I was going for an associate thing for doing some training work. And this guy literally talked at me for 49 minutes. And I said the sum total of, Paul. That's all I said, 40 odd minutes. And he said, do you know what? I think you're the sort of guy we like round here. I was thinking, based on what? The fact that I nodded and stayed awake. But so the unprepared, the sort of shoot from the lip kind of person can be great, but they're doing it all on their gut instinct. So that might work for you, but just be prepared for that, because I've definitely seen that. And certainly a lot of startups, they'll have this sort of crazy person come in, and just go, yeah, how's it going? Yeah, we love our canteen. Your food's great. Right. So assuming that you've done your prep, then you need to stare at them. I covered this in the article a couple of weeks ago, but just a reminder, this is came from Dan Charlie, because I liked his version of it where he put the E on the end. So the point of this is that your stories fit into this format. So situation is the S. What was it? Broadly, quickly get to the nub of it. The task or the target. So what were you there to do? So we had to get this. So this is the point. They go, all right, again, brief and no jargon, because no one cares, unless they're even if they are in the industry. Even different airlines have different language, so you can't assume that they'll get it. Obviously, a galley's a galley, but apart from that, you just don't know. Activity, what happened? This is where you shove your codable stuff in. I did this, I did that, blah, 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 blah. That's the bit that they can code if they're using a formal format. The most important part for me is the R, because it's the result. And this is where you have to go, boom. And this is why it really mattered. And this is the way we turned it around. And this is what happened at the end of it. So they have no doubt in your mind that you're a result-orientated human, and that you give them it, like, lay it out for them. So it's unmistakable. So when they're coding it, they might go, yeah, it was a bit shaky at the start, but brilliant evidence. She gave me brilliant. And then the last bit, which is what Dan used, and I hadn't come across this, was the E, but this is really important. It's the evaluate. So you're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to say, okay, if it would happen again, because sometimes they say, what have you learned from that situation? Would you do anything differently? And I think you need to be honest, because if you think, actually, that didn't go brilliantly, and probably with hindsight, I could have done ... say that. Obviously, don't sort of snatch defeat from the jaws of victory by destroying all your good evidence beforehand. Yeah, I don't know why they gave me the job either. I'm rubbish. But just sort of think, yeah, be honest and just say, yeah, I think I probably would have done the same again, actually, with I did the best knowing what I knew. Or with hindsight, I probably could have just checked with my manager before I did that. But luckily, it turned out okay. But that's the point of learning. So don't try and be perfect. So they may ask you that. So that's the sort of the more traditional format. Okay. So lastly, end well. Thank you very much. Look down the camera, or if it's face to face, if we're ever allowed out of our houses again, proper handshake, look them in the eye. Thank you very much. And thank all of them. Try and give the equal eye contact, and just try and leave with a great last impression as well. And we're all good at this because of our customer service training, aren't we? First impressions, last impressions. We know this. It's the same in an interview. The whole thing about an interview is just a way for them to get a chance to understand what you might be like. Now, here's a couple of options just before we leave this slide. Afterwards, somebody told me about this, and I just thought this is a great idea. And I have done this, and sometimes it's paid off. Sending a quick note afterwards, just say, thank you ever so much for the time. I was really interested in that. Here's what I promised to send. Or I was really curious about such and such, and fingers crossed it goes my way. Or just something, if you felt like you made a connection with someone, then it could be the thing that differentiates you from the 10 other people that didn't do that. So not too sucky uppy, but just a sort of a genuine, like, thank you very much, because that took their time and effort. A typical interview could be anything like 45 minutes to 60 minutes, sometimes 90 minutes, as some of the scary ones I've done. So it was time out of their diary, and it was time for you. And so it's worth finishing it well. So the closing and the thank you afterwards are really, really important. And just for your own mental health, the last thing is try not to brood over that particular question. You know, the one, the curveball question that came from nowhere, and you think, oh, I can't believe I froze on that one. I didn't have an answer for that. But they're taking a balance of the whole interview and what you're like. And people, I always say to people, and I used to train them to interview, look for the right attitude, and you can train the skills and knowledge. Hire the smile, train the skill, as the old cliche used to go. Okay, so these are all really good things I think you can think about. So I'd like to show you something now, which is a worked example. So this is somebody I interviewed a while ago. Look at the lighting. Okay, so I've just covered the face, but I'm also distracted by the things around this person. The light's behind them, so they're in shadow. I don't know what their face is doing. So you see what I mean? So it's really important to get the light in front of you. You know, natural light's the best, obviously, if you get interviewed during the day, but just one of these little, you know, tripod lights, they're not expensive, and it's just well worth it. So this person here, who knows what's going on? So you want the backdrop to be also clear as well. And all of this you can see if you record yourself. You can then look and see, oh my God, how does that look? Okay. This isn't an ideal room, by the way, but this cupboard in my house is the only place that I can get in without being disturbed. So it's not the best, but I've removed a few distractions behind me. Trev, could you show the next slide, please? I want to show a worked example. So I was thinking what might be helpful here is just to give you a tip. So I did a research on a bit of a company, not a bit of a company, an actual company. And this company shall remain nameless, so hopefully you won't Google who they are. But I just put in this company, their company values. Now, what up pops these 4 statements here? We value difference. We succeed together. We take responsibility. We get it done. Okay. I'm not a betting man, but if I was going to go for an interview with this company, I would prepare around these 4 areas and say, right, we value difference. That's an inclusivity question. Okay. So when have I been inclusive? When have I stood up for somebody not being inclusive? Anything like that. Yeah. Find an example. We succeed together, collaborating across boundaries. So succeed together is team orientated. Across boundary means, so for example, you did a flight report, the catering wasn't to the standard that you wanted, but I didn't just put in a snotty report. I phoned them up and had a chat with them. You know, that's a collaborating across boundaries. Okay, you might have to do a bit of explaining what the significance of that story is that we all take for granted, but that sort of example might help. We take responsibility. So this one, I thought, oh, what would I do for this one? I thought actually something went wrong and you dealt with it. Yeah, that's it. Something went wrong and you took accountability and you took a long-term view. So you might have thought about that with customer service recovery. Something went really badly wrong for this customer, but I thought to myself, what could I do to help them? And I want them to come back. It's an upper class person, or it's a first class person, it's a business class person, or it's just a passenger in coach. You know, it doesn't really matter. But I just thought to myself, they're on a holiday. They've obviously spent thousands to be here. If they're going to Miami, they've got 3 kids with them. That's an expensive holiday by anybody's money. Yeah. The last one here, we get it done. What on earth does that mean? Moving at pace and making things happen. So I would probably think about working efficiently, making things, dealt with difficult situation against the odds and to a tight deadline. Well, we all have those, don't we? Moving at pace, making things happen. So just when you look at the values, then start matching your stories to it. So that's my kind of the main dash through of some of what I'd call the top tips so far that I've spent from years of watching people being interviewed, training people to interview, and running assessment centers where you use competencies and really start to watch people's micro signals and everything and try to then code it after to say, what's this person like? I will welcome some questions if you've got some around these particular areas. But I also want to just say that someone leaves some sort of like closing thoughts here. So the one thing I want to say is that the reason why we practice and prepare is to give us the poise under pressure. Okay, so when you find yourself going into a situation and you feel a bit uncomfortable with it, if you've prepared and thought about that, your brain is already slightly calmer. And that means it's not then a threat. So if you did an interview every day for 2 weeks with a different, by the end of 2 weeks, you wouldn't care. You'd be completely yourself because you've desensitized to the threat. Okay, so that is my first thing. The next thing is, if you've got an interview, remember they already like you. They wouldn't bother. They haven't got the time or the interest to interview 200 applicants. They've already whittled you down. So no matter what the job is, they already are considering employing you. They are already in a yes state. So don't get in your own way by scuppering it, by not preparing or worrying about the nerves. They know you're going to be nervous. The nerves are actually a sign that you care. So nerves are just a sort of emotional or physical reactions in your body that then you label, I must be scared, but you could also be excited. So these things are the same. So you label them what's useful to you. When you get in there, if you've managed to practice and keep your threat level down, then you could actually end up enjoying it. And what they want to see is poise under pressure. They already like you and you're both there to solve the same problem. You want a job where somewhere they value you and you can use your strengths and skills and attributes and all the rest of it. And they want a great person like you to fulfill the gap that they have in their current organization. Somebody they can trust, somebody that will fit in with the team. It's not going to cause them any dramas. So you're both meeting to solve the same problem. Okay, so the only question, so we've got a question here about tips with sound and lighting. The main one is just to check what you've got. So I'm not suggesting you should invest in loads and loads of lighting and rigs and microphones and all that, soundproof equipment, because that's just crazy. Look at what you've got now and record yourself doing a meeting on Zoom or Teams. Just have a meeting with yourself. It's not going to be a great meeting unless you're a raging extrovert, but have a meeting with yourself, record it, play it back, see what the sound's like, see what the lighting's like. Okay. That will give you enough. If the sound's then a bit dodgy, then you need to go and invest in a microphone, a cheap USB mic. Don't go mad. It's enough just to carry the sound, okay? Lighting, get one of those tripod lights behind the laptop in front of your face. That should be enough. Make sure you're near a good Wi-Fi signal, because that's the other thing, that you could be full flow giving some amazing stories, but to them you're like that. So it's really important to get a good Wi-Fi signal. And I know that's really obvious, but we forget these things. Sometimes we're a bit nervous. Right, is it good practice to take a few personality factors exercises to maybe adjust to certain styles of interviewers? I think that it's very useful to know that. So the 4 types that generally people talk about is like the direct, fiery red type person, assertive, confident, get to the point, what's the bottom line? Then you've got your sunshine yellow, expressive, enthusiastic, lively type person. You've got your earth green, which is your calmer, more reserved, probably more intimate, kind of slower speaking, more reflective. And then you've got what we call the cool blue, which is a bit more analytical, logical, detailed. So there's no harm in matching, but you've got to be fairly swift of foot to be able to do that in the moment. So my suggestion is know what you're like, and then just either speed up or slow down. So if someone particularly asks for you for detail, give them the detail. If they're kind of going, so how's it going? And they just want to shoot the breeze a bit, that's probably a sunshine yellow type person. Meet them where they are, and then hopefully at some point they'll meet you where you are. I had an interview 2 hours. We just kept talking for ages afterwards. I mentioned the Virgin link and they loved it, fascinated with the experience I had. Yeah, and that's the ideal, isn't it? That is the ideal. And don't forget that if you work for an airline, and people are really interested in that, aren't they? There's something that's a talking point. So even now, if I ever mention all the different things I've done in my life, it's the bit where I work for an airline. The people go, oh, that's really interesting. Did you meet and did you go to? And so don't forget that these are great things. And when somebody connects with you that way, unless they're trying to groom you for a date, this is a good sign that the interview has gone well. It doesn't guarantee you'll get it, but it shows that you've got high rapport. So someone will have to work really hard to knock you then off the podium, wouldn't they? Any other questions? Can I wear my Speedos for the excitement factor? Well, as long as it's not Simon asking this. There are some places where they say be yourself and bring your personality to it, but then you've got to check who's saying that, because I've seen some banks that say we totally embrace the whole person. We want you to be your exciting normal self, but everything about it doesn't suggest that. So you need to be really careful that, because the culture fit does not mean turn up in kind of flip-flops and sombrero. They might think themselves one way, that's their espoused values, but it doesn't necessarily mean that in the real world, that's exactly what happens. And I know people that have gone for interviews with quite traditional, let me say, transport companies and been told, we want your creativity, we want your ideas. And that's the exact opposite experience that they got when they went for the interview, and it knocked them flying. So I'm going to kind of wrap up now, but what I want to say is, hope you found that useful. I will read the comments afterwards. If there's anything that I can sort of answer, then I will come back and comment in the Facebook and wherever it's posted afterwards. So I'll leave that to the guys to do that. But I just want to link to next week. So next week coming up is Matt Dockery's back. Now, I don't know if you remember him. He had that COVID. Well, I know you probably heard about COVID, but he had it pretty bad. He was on the news and he was in the papers and stuff like that. Well, he's coming to give us an update. So please know he's still alive, but he'll be coming back next time to tell us a little bit more what's happened since that day. So thank you ever so much for listening. I hope it's been useful. And like I say, put some comments below and I'll reply to them if there's anything that I've missed. Take care.
Not Just Crew has been internationally inspired by you.